welcome to the second installment on DNA and LDS beliefs. This is in response to some criticisms leveled by a couple of YouTubies who understood the last presentation I made. This is not as aesthetically refined as I would like it to be, but it contains the graphical elements that will be far more effective in making my points than I'd be able to achieve if I was just giving this via text to a general audience. Well, there's some good news. Some people have understood the points of my last video. The first to do such was Same to You to just a little joke. Some, and a few others that have watched it, found some good questions in relation to issues they see. Now, I want to make sure others see what they see, both to understand the issues they had and to see why their issues don't have the oomph, the potency that they presently suppose it has. We'll start off with the graphical representation of an ancestral/pedigree chart. Here we have 6 generations back from a single individual. As a review, the DNA evidence used thus far with any conclusive results with regard to the Book of Mormon are mDNA, which would go down matriarchal lines, and Y chromosome DNA. And since these go strictly along these lines, they would only be indicators of who your mother's mother, mother, all the way back was, or your father's father, all the way back was. Now this here is a demonstration of where lines get cut off. These are patriarchal lines getting cut off, matriarchal lines getting cut off. Just so you get an idea of what's going to happen when things get cut off. And this is as pertains to a single individual. So these particular lines, even though these are ancestors to this individual, these lines would not be manifest at all in the tests with Y chromosome DNA and mitochondrial DNA evidence in this individual. The person represented by the circle. So here we have the generations going back, just so you clearly know how many generations we have here. There's 6 represented, but obviously generations go back much further than that. Now if we look at these as they go back, we find that the ratio of manifest genetic evidence versus the portion of the ancestral base that isn't represented, the ratio gets really low, abysmally fast. You go from 1 to 1, 1 to 2, back 20 generations and it's around 1 to a million. You go back 56 generations and it's 1 to 17 trillion. So it's pretty abysmal if you're a critic of the Book of Mormon as far as this goes. But hold on a second, might be the cry of those of my intelligent critics, and rightly so. There will be overlap. We haven't tested just one individual, so at some point the number of shared ancestors would be significant. Again, if we take these circles as being the ancestors that have been tested, at some point in the past their ancestors are going to start aligning with each other. Now we'll take a look back at the family tree. Now if you notice, say we take this mother and father here, this great whatever grandfather and grandmother, say that they not only had a son but they had a daughter. That way the daughter would be able to, in theory, be one to pass her genetic line on down to another individual that was tested. So not all of these that were cut off here are going to be cut off for the whole of all the individuals. Now you might say, doesn't this undo, unravel, and set at naught what Hive Radical has said? No, not really. And I'll demonstrate why it doesn't. To start with, let's look back at the general nature of descent. And I'll demonstrate why it doesn't. To start with, let's look back at the general nature of descent. Now, first off, here's a disclaimer. We're approaching, we're operating on certain assumptions with regard to human ancestry. namely that all present-day humans are genetically descended from Adam and Eve, and that our genetic lines went through a diluvial bottleneck. That is to say, that all genetics present now would run through some of the 8 survivors of the Great Flood of Noah's day. If you have a problem with that, then your problem is not specifically with Mormonism, but with theology in general. So here's a general representation of the overall genetic landscape with those assumptions. We have Adam and Eve, and Noah, his wife and daughters-in-law, all of Noah's sons genetically tied to Noah and his wife, though even this assumption is not inherently correct, as Noah could have had other wives, but that doesn't really affect what I'm going to demonstrate. But anyway, so again we have Adam and Eve and the bottleneck of the diluvial period. Say we take this representation and place a hypothetical link to you. We'll say that this little circle is you, and then there's a line of descent that we trace back through it. Now, it could really be any crazy line, since the graphical representation is almost entirely dependent on the construct you've chosen, and the graphical representation of such construct. Now, we all have a great number of lines between us and these key ancestors. In a graphical composite, the portion of the genetic landscape that is tied to you will roughly resemble a diamond. This is due to the inevitable fact that at some point the ancestors begin to occupy several different slots on the same or adjoining generations. That is, ancestors will be shared, and not only among different individuals, but on the same person. You may have one ancestor in several spots that would be the same person, by the narrowing of the diamond from above. So we go back at kind of this divergent here, max it out, and then it starts to narrow back in, roughly. Now, the key in this, with regard to the specific theme at hand, is that there's a point at which shared ancestry is almost unavoidable. After roughly this point, the likelihood of a shared ancestor becomes a virtual certainty among people. So this would change, this whole graph itself would change relative to which individual. And again, however you wanted to lay it out. You could have radicals like this or whatever, and groups like this could be shared among many different individuals, but they'd all be roughly a diamond shape like this. Now, how does this tie into the historical claims of the Book of Mormon? How does it help or hurt the objections of my more intelligent critics? We'll get into that.